The next topic we will discuss is the allocation of attention. How do we determine where we are going to allocate our attentional processing resources, what we will selectively attend to, and what we will ignore? We can identify two basic types of attentional control. Exogenous attentional control occurs when there is some property of the environment that drives us to pay attention to it. For example, a sudden bright light or a loud sound may simply involuntarily drag our attention towards it, a quick alert system of sorts. Endogenous attentional control takes place when a person chooses themselves what to pay attention to, not based on anything that is particularly pulling their attention, but based on their own goals and interests in relation to their environment. In addition, we can divide up attentional control into overt and covert attention. Overt attention refers to when we are tending to the place where we are looking directly. In other words, when we are placing our fovea, which is the most spatially accurate location of our retina, in a location such that it is processing that particular part of the environment. For example, when you stare at the red cross in the middle of this letter grid, you are likely foveating it, and you are getting the most precise spatial information from that particular part of the image. Covert attention takes place when we are foveating or fixating in one place, but paying attention to a different location. For example, if you hold your gaze on the red cross and attempt to read the other letters in the row that it's in, you may find that you're attending to different letters, paying attention to them and trying to read them, even without moving your eyes there. This demonstrates that where we look and what we're paying attention to are in fact not the same thing. Typically, we pay attention to where we look. However, this need not be the case, because attention ultimately is not about sensation, but about perception. Sensation is what we do when we decide to fixate and bring information into our fovea. Attention and processing is what we do when our brain decides which of that information to further process. Next, we'll talk about the purpose of attention. One way to think about attention is that it's pre-activating or readying the processing needed for a specific stimuli that are either present or about to be present. This can make us more sensitive to certain stimuli in a particular location or of a certain type. In an early demonstration of this, Posner compared detection speed for a stimulus that was presented after it had been cued for a particular location. For example, in this particular case, participants may be presented with two possible locations that a stimulus may be presented in. Then they may be cued with an arrow as to where the stimulus was likely to be presented. Finally, the stimulus is presented. In this sequence, the cue to the location was valid because the stimulus ultimately appeared where the cue had indicated it should. In this case, the cue is indicating that the stimulus is likely to be presented on the right, but the stimulus ends up being presented on the left. This is an invalid condition. In Posner's experiment, most of the time, the cue is accurate. On 80% of trials, the stimulus would be presented exactly where the cue said it would be. However, on 20%, it was invalid, and the participants were presented with the stimulus in the location that was not indicated by the cue. Posner found that even though participants maintained their fixation throughout the entire sequence, they were faster at detecting the stimulus and responding correctly when it appeared in the cued location versus the non-cued location. This means that what participants were doing was paying attention to a location where the stimulus was likely to be, even while maintaining their fixation the entire time. When the stimulus appeared in the place where they were expecting, their brain was ready for it. It was primed. In other words, processing had already begun for that location before the stimulus was presented, and therefore when it did finally arrive, they were ready for it and able to respond faster than when it was presented in a place that they weren't expecting. Another proposed function of attention is to integrate various different sources of information into a single object. For example, this particular object here has both a shape and a color. Shape and color are known to be processed in different early parts of the brain. However, when we perceive this, we perceive it as an upside down orange triangle or a purple ring. The convergence of these different features may depend on selective attention. In order to demonstrate this, researchers have used a task called visual search, where the goal of the participant is to look for a certain target object among a group of distractors. Here's an example of what's known as a single feature search. You're going to search for a green item amongst distractors. Ready? Let's try it again. Can you find the green item? How about now? One more. What you notice is that the number of distractors is increasing in each of these sequences. However, you may have also noticed that this task is very easy, and the number of distractors does not particularly make the task any more difficult. Let's work for a tilted item. That was easy. How about a round item? Also simple. How about a moving item? That too was really easy. And that's because, in this case, the target was distinguished from the distractors based on a single feature. That single feature made that target pop out. It stood out from amongst the rest, and therefore it actually attracted our attention. Single feature search task, the target is defined by one property: color, orientation, or movement. In a double conjunction search, however, the target is defined by two properties. For example, we may be asked to search for the red upright target or the green slanted target. Neither the color or the orientation completely defines the target. Let's see an example. Here we're going to search for a red tilted item. As you can tell, this is somewhat more difficult. If you haven't found it yet, take a moment to find the red tilted item. Now we're going to search for a green upright item. In this case, again, you might have found it more difficult to find the target than in the previous examples. Double conjunction search is known to be more difficult than single feature search. In fact, it has a very reliable and predictable property relative to single feature search. Let's look at some results. In single feature search, the set size, which is shown on the x-axis, does not typically increase reaction time. In other words, we can keep adding distractors, and this does not typically mean that it will take the participant longer to find the target. In conjunction search, however, this is not the case. Here we see a linear relationship between the set size, which is the number of distractors, and how long it takes participants to find the target. Why would this be? According to feature integration theory, this is explainable based on the idea that in order to determine whether any particular target has two features requires selectively attending to it. As we add more and more distractors, the participant has to check each one of those distractors to determine whether it has the appropriate features to be the target. Therefore, each distractor adds a certain predictable amount of time. It takes longer, by the way, to be able to identify whether the target is not present, indicated by the arrow marked negative, and that's because typically we have to check many more items to determine that a target isn't present, whereas in a positive case where the target is present, we only have to search until we find the target. This typically will take about half the targets that we have to check in order to find the one that is